In 1872, the crew of a vessel named Dei Gratia spotted something strange in the open sea. A ship drifting aimlessly with its sails tattered. At first, they thought it could be a wreck or maybe a desperate attempt at a distress signal. But as they pulled alongside, what they found was far more chilling. The ship was the Mary Celeste, and it was completely abandoned. There was no captain, no crew, and no signs of struggle. Just a perfectly intact vessel floating like a ghost through open waters. Half-eaten meals sat on the tables, as if the people eating them had simply stood up and vanished. People from the Dei Gratia boarded the ship to see what was happening, but none of them could quite comprehend what had transpired. It was clear that something mysterious had occurred, and the more they looked, the less sense it made. For over 150 years, the fate of the Mary Celeste has remained one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the sea. So buckle up, because this is quite the story. But to understand how a ship that seemed so normal became the most infamous ghost ship in history, we have to go back to its cursed beginning. The Mary Celeste wasn't always called the Mary Celeste. It was built in 1861 in a quiet Nova Scotia shipyard, carved from local timber and crafted for the open sea. But at this time, she would be called the Amazon. It was a sturdy brigantine, 99 feet long, with 2 masts, and a hull built to last. On paper, she was made for success, but from the moment she touched the water, it was as if fate had other plans. The Amazon's first captain, Robert McLellan, never even made it out of the harbor. Before its maiden voyage was complete, he mysteriously fell ill and died within days. A bad omen? Maybe. But things only got worse. Under new leadership, the Amazon collided with fishing equipment off the coast of Maine. Then, not long after, she plowed straight into another ship while traveling on the English Channel, sending it to the ocean floor. And that was just the beginning. For a few years, the Mary Celeste sailed the Atlantic without much incident, but trouble found it again in 1867 when a brutal storm slammed it into the shores of Cape Breton Island. It got so badly damaged that the owners abandoned it as a total loss. Within a month, a local businessman snatched up the wreck, only to flip it in 1868 to an American sailor, Richard W. Haynes. Haynes paid $1,750 for the Amazon, which at this point was barely even afloat, then sank another $8,825 into rebuilding it. But here's where things took a turn. He renamed the Amazon to the Mary Celeste, a bold move considering how superstitious sailors were about renaming ships. Some believed it was an open invitation for disaster, and disaster answered. In 1869, Haynes lost the ship to the bank. She was seized and sold off again, and by 1872, the Mary Celeste had passed through several owners, each seemingly eager to get rid of her. The last buyer was a New York Business Association, led by James H. Winchester, who invested another $10,000, stretching its length to 103 feet, adding a second deck, and reinforcing the structure. By the time the Mary Celeste was ready to sail again, ownership was split between Winchester, 2 minor investors, and Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, a seasoned sailor who had staked his own money for its future. This is where the real mystery begins. You see, Briggs was no fool. He was born into a family of sea captains, and he was deeply religious, disciplined, and respected. Initially, he planned to break away from his family's long lineage of sailors and pursue a business career in New York. Yet, despite his ambitions, he couldn't resist one final voyage, the ill-fated journey of the Mary Celeste. In October 1872, he took command of the Mary Celeste's first major voyage after the rebuild, to go on a routine cargo run from New York to Genoa, Italy. Journeys like these were long, and would take big ships like the Mary Celeste about 40 to 50 days to complete. But for Briggs, this trip wasn't just business, it was personal. Briggs had brought his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia on board to accompany him along the journey. Briggs handpicked a trusted crew of 7 men. His first mate, Albert G. Richardson, the 25-year-old second mate, a steward, and the rest of the crew, which consisted of 4 seasoned German sailors from the Frisian Islands. By all accounts, everything seemed normal. The ship carried over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, a routine cargo, nothing unusual. Before departure, Briggs wrote to his mother, "Our vessel is in beautiful trim, and I hope we shall have a fine passage." There was no sign of trouble, and everything seemed to be pretty normal. The journey started off well, as Briggs' wife wrote one final letter from Staten Island to her mother, saying, "The crew appears to be quietly capable, if they continue as they have begun." And just like that, they set sail in the cold waters of November, traveling into the vastness that is the Atlantic Ocean. Although not much is known about what exactly happened during the voyage, we do know that something terrible occurred halfway through. 8 days after the Mary Celeste set sail, the Dei Gratia departed New Jersey, following a similar route across the Atlantic. It was commanded by Captain David Morehouse, and he had no connections to the Mary Celeste, or so it seemed. Though legends say that Morehouse and Briggs dined together before their departures, there was no solid proof. Either way, their paths were about to cross in a way no one could have predicted. For nearly a month, the Mary Celeste was silent, and no one received any word from the people on board. Then, on December 4th at 1 p.m., a member of the Dei Gratia crew spotted a ship drifting aimlessly about 400 miles east of the Azores. Its sails were partially set but tattered, flapping weakly in the wind. Morehouse signaled to the ship, but he got no response. He tried again, and still nothing. He got suspicious, so he ordered a boarding party to investigate. As they approached, it became increasingly clear that they had stumbled upon the Mary Celeste. The moment the men of Dei Gratia stepped aboard, they knew something was deeply wrong. The deck was empty, there was no crew and no passengers, just an unsettling silence. The lifeboat was missing, yet below deck, everything remained untouched. 6 months' worth of food and water sat unbothered. The cargo was also intact. There was some water in the hold, around 3.5 feet, which was actually normal for ships, and nothing severe enough to force an evacuation. But strangest of all, the crew's belongings, their clothes, their valuables, everything was still there, as if they had simply vanished into thin air. The last log entry was dated November 25th, which meant the ship had been drifting near the Azores unmanned for 9 days. But why? There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no damage, and no indication of what had happened. The only things missing, aside from the people, were the navigation instruments and the lifeboat. However, there was also one item that seemed out of place. A makeshift sounding rod that could be used to measure the levels of water on deck. But first, why was the lifeboat missing? Even if the entire crew decided to abandon the ship, a single lifeboat wouldn't have been large enough to hold all 7 of them comfortably. It would have literally been a death sentence. So if they did end up leaving, it must have been truly a last resort. With no answers, Morehouse decided to tow the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, a grueling journey that took weeks due to rough weather and a lack of crew. When they finally arrived, salvage hearings began immediately, which meant Morehouse and his crew were entitled to an award for saving the ship. However, there were still so many questions that remained unanswered. What happened to Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their daughter Sophia, and the 7 crew members of the Mary Celeste? Did they just teleport from the ship to some parallel dimension? Were they actually all murdered? Or were they abducted by aliens? Maybe disaster struck, so they were forced to take the lifeboat out to the sea. Again, when the ship was found adrift in the Atlantic, it was still fully stocked with supplies. On top of that, there were no signs of struggle found anywhere. Yet, here she was, drifting in the ocean, completely abandoned. No one aboard was ever seen or heard from again. While there is still no verdict around what exactly occurred on that ship, a lot of theories have revolved around it ever since the incident occurred. One theory suggests a tragic miscalculation. The ship's only working pump had been dismantled, meaning Briggs may have had no way to check how much water was in the hold. If he thought the ship was sinking, he might have ordered everyone onto the lifeboat, planning to return once things settled. But the ocean is a treacherous place. Any sudden storms or high winds could have carried them away, leaving the Mary Celeste to drift on, perfectly intact but completely empty. Then there's the alcohol theory. The ship was carrying over 1,700 barrels of industrial booze, and 9 were mysteriously empty. Some believe fumes from the leaking barrels created a risk of explosion. Maybe Briggs panicked, thinking the ship was about to go up in flames. So he ordered an evacuation. But when no explosion came, they were already packed in on the lifeboat, lost at sea. Other theories included pirates and even a mutiny. However, neither made sense, because if there really was an attack, they would have stolen valuables on the ship, but all of the passengers' personal belongings remained untouched. Some people blamed darker forces, such as aliens or paranormal activity, but again, there were no signs of violence or wreckage, so that means no sea monsters either. But seriously, literally no one could figure out what had happened on the ship. If the disappearance wasn't strange enough, the legal battle that followed was downright bizarre. The British authorities immediately suspected foul play. Frederick Solly Flood, Gibraltar's Attorney General, came up with a wild theory. The crew got drunk, murdered Briggs and his family, then escaped, but further forensic tests proved him wrong. There was no blood, no struggle, and no evidence of anything sinister. Just a ship with no crew and no answers. In the end, Morehouse and his crew were rewarded with a finder's payment, far lower than expected since suspicion of foul play still lingered over them. The Mary Celeste continued sailing for years under various captains, and its story did not end until 1885, when a shady guy deliberately wrecked her off of Haiti in an insurance fraud scheme. Investigators exposed the fraud, and while he managed to dodge prison, he died broke and disgraced just months later. The Mary Celeste was now gone, but its legend had only just begun. Over 150 years later, the Mary Celeste remains one of the ocean's greatest mysteries, and the fate of the crew is still unknown to this day. Even though we may never know what truly happened to the unfortunate people aboard the ship, it's a reminder that the ocean is truly an extensive place that still, to this day, humans haven't been able to fully uncover.